Okay, now, hopefully after thinking about it a little bit, you realize that the company should increase price if they're in the inelastic region, right? So again, this is something, if it's inelastic, that means there's people are not very responsive to price changes, which means if you bring the price up, the price change in the upward direction is going to be greater than the quantity change in the negative direction, so you end up making more money. Or, sorry, the firm ends up making more money. By the way, that's answer choice D. All right, so that's all the material. All right, so that's all the material on price elasticity of demand. Next, we're going to look at income elasticity, a new elasticity measure. So here, we're looking at income elasticity. So now we're looking at, instead of responsiveness in terms of price, we're going to look at responsiveness in terms of income. And as we've already learned, changes in income shift the demand curve. And we hadn't really talked about it yet, but a good question you might have had when we talked about it was, well, how much is it shifting the demand curve when there's a change in income? Well, that's exactly what income elasticity will tell us. It tells us how much the demand curve is going to shift in response to a change in income. Okay, so again, the income elasticity of demand shows or measures how a change in income affects spending, how much it shifts the demand curve. Now, as far as our formula goes, it's pretty similar. It's almost identical, in fact. The only difference is that rather than having percent change in price in the denominator, we now have percent change in income. And we're still going to use the midpoint method for this. So we're going to use the average of the two quantities and the average of the two incomes as our point of reference. So we can use the exact same formula. We're just replacing price with income now. Now, there is one important difference here between the income elasticity and the price elasticity of demand. So we learned that the price elasticity of demand is always negative because of the law of demand. Income inelasticity, on the other hand, can be either positive or negative. And the sign is going to tell us something a bit more about what type of good it is. And this is actually, we're going to have a little bit of a recap, a little bit of a review here. So the sign is basically telling us whether the good is a normal good or whether it's an inferior good. So recall back to chapter 3 talking about normal goods and inferior goods with regard to income. Our income elasticity, the sign of it, is telling us whether it's a normal good or an inferior good. Okay, so let's make sure we recall what a normal good is. So basically, a normal good is, if you'll recall, when you make more money, you buy more of that thing, right? So your income and the quantity demanded move in the same directions, and so our income elasticity for normal goods will be a positive number since they move in the same direction. So if your income goes down, you buy less, and if your income goes up, you buy more. That's a normal good. And so since they have the same sign, when we divide two positive numbers by each other, we get a positive. If we divide a negative number by a negative number, it's still positive. So there you go. Negative divided by a negative is positive. And so normal goods will have a positive income elasticity. Whereas inferior goods will have a negative number for their income elasticity. And that's because, remember, for inferior goods, if you make more money, you buy less of the inferior good, right? So they move in opposite directions, and so you'll have a negative number for income elasticity if it's inferior. There's one other thing that the number tells us, and it's really only if it's a normal good, but the size of the number will tell us whether it's a necessity or a luxury. Okay, so if it's sort of in that 0 to 1 bounded region, You can kind of think of this in terms of inelastic, right? It's a necessity, right? Things that are necessities are inelastic, especially with regard to income. Whereas luxuries were more responsive to income changes. So the elastic things are going to be luxuries, right? Things anytime that this number is greater than 1. So our range is still the same in terms of elastic versus inelastic, and we can relate that to whether it's a necessity or a luxury. All right, so here's some practice. You'll probably want to pause the video for this, but go through each of these items here and state whether you think the good is normal or inferior, and then also if it's a normal good, whether it's a necessity or a luxury. All right, some more practice. Suppose that Doug receives a pay increase at work and his income increases by 20%. And as a result, Doug decides to buy 12% less ground beef. What does this mean for Doug? What type of good is ground beef? If you need to, pause the video. Okay, so let's go through this one together. All right, so our income elasticity, so EI, is equal to the percent change in quantity demanded. That's still on top, so that hasn't changed. What is different, though, is it's now percent change in income, right? Okay, so there's our formula. Now we're told that he gets a pay increase of 20%, so that's the bottom here, pay increase of positive 20%. And we're told that he decreases his consumption of ground beef by 12%. So that's percent change in quantity demanded. It's a negative 12%. Okay, so there's the numbers we're going to plug in. So we've got negative 12 divided by 20. And I'm not sure what that is off the top of my head. Let's see if I can reduce this real quick. So let's see, that'd be 6 and 10, which is 3 and 5. So it's the same as negative 3 divided by 5, which is negative 60, negative 0.6. So let me write that here, negative 0.6. All right, so there we go. All right, so since it's negative, we know that it is an inferior good. So the correct answer is D. D is the correct answer. And you maybe didn't even need to calculate the number. You could have just realized that his income went down. His income went up, and his quantity demanded of ground beef went down. And so just knowing that, you should have been able to figure out that it was inferior. All right, so that concludes the section on income elasticity. Next, we're going to look at something called cross-price elasticity. Okay, so here we're going to look at cross-price elasticity. This one